It's the end of the tiers for category leagues, and we're talking about centers. And Michael Bolton is here for the ride.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NBA fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and don't make unnecessary journeys. Don't take risks on treacherous roads. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and I have a terrible Irish accent. And you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_Beeble, on TikTok at redrock_Beeble, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now, through to September the 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free and we are available on all platforms, so hit the thumb and double bang and all that stuff. So, getting to the end of the category league tiers, I do think that I will do a points league tier show. Or shows, just similar sort of stuff. The tiering in points leagues is probably not as important and positional stuff is not as important in points leagues, and I'll be sure to stress that when we do it, because honestly, take the player that you think is going to score the most fantasy points is realistically the main strategy there. So it's not as positional, and I'll address that. We'll talk about that, but there will be something coming. Don't worry. We are here to finish this off. We're talking centers, and I knew what would happen. At the start of this series, I was like, okay, in the past, we've given each player one position. And people go, why isn't this guy here? Why isn't this guy here? And then, so I decided to use whatever their positional eligibility was on Yahoo to put them into these to try to capture that. And then someone's like, man, this just repeats. Just do one position. You cannot please everybody. So I do apologize for that. I understand you can't please everybody, but we are sticking with this idea of if you've got this position eligibility, that's where you sit. So we're talking centers. Like I said here, it's the way we got to go. It's the position we head to, and we go to tier 1. This is not like rocket science stuff as to who's at the top of the center list. It is the 2 best players in fantasy basketball. But I actually do think, and this is not to say that I would take this guy at number 1 in every draft, but I do think there is a gap. A big enough gap to consider a different tier between Victor Wembanyama and Nikola Jokic. So, for the sake of this exercise, I'm going to put Wemby in tier 1. Again, I would probably, if I had 5 number 1 overall picks in drafts, I would take Jokic in 2 and Wemby in 3 most likely. But I do think, again, with the projections and how it looks in a category format, that Wemby sits atop. There are arguments to be made that if you take away Wemby's blocks, which is obviously an outrageous stat, then he does come back to the pack and fall behind a lot of these guys. And I understand that argument. I think there's some rationale to it, and it makes a lot of sense. That that big boost might skew some of the stuff. There's also the argument that with that big boost, it enables you to focus other picks on other areas and still maintain a solid lead in blocks, which does really help you quite a bit. And I also see that side of it. But we do sit here with Victor Wembanyama sitting at number 1 in the tier 1 by himself. Doesn't mean I would take him universally at number 1 in drafts. I'm okay with going either way. But I do have him at number 1. That means at number 2, not a tough one. We're going to bring back a man's a bit bigger, a bit larger. We're going to put our number 2 tier as on his own. Jahlil Okafor sits at Nikola Jokic sits at number 2. Interestingly, Jokic has an ADP of 2 on both Yahoo and ESPN, and Wemby has an ADP of 2 on Yahoo and 3 on ESPN. Not really sure who's going ahead of him, but at 3. But Jokic sits at 2. I don't know what you want me to tell you about Jokic, really. He's going to be great. Again, we hope he doesn't cop any serious injuries, same as we hope that for all players. Don't really see any sort of sizable drop-off or anything like that, but his efficiency is really what drives him. and Wemby has some inefficiency. So I guess if you were wanting to look at that in a different way, and part of the, I don't doubt in roto leagues, I think efficiency and percentages is very, very important. In head-to-head category leagues, I think it could become a little less important because they are one of the higher variance fluctuation categories week to week, and head-to-head is a week-to-week game. And I think there are times that we over-index the importance of percentages on a week-to-week basis. But Jokic sits at number 2. I don't think there's any really problem with that's what am I doing? That's the easy stuff. It's the easiest thing. We talk about those two guys sit at the top. Wemby, Jokic, 1, 2. Put them both in tier 1 if you want. Whatever. The tier 3 guys are the 2 players who sat actually at the top of tier 1 for power forwards. These are players who I think could easily, like Wemby, Jokic, and Giannis and AD, they could easily round out the top 6 draft picks in a fantasy draft. So we could have 3 tiers in 6 picks, which I think is reasonable. Like Giannis's ADP is 6 and 5. AD's is 17 on ESPN, which, come on, what are we doing? But it sits at 8 on Yahoo. But like these are guys who could all go in the top 6, and you're going to have 4 center eligible players go in that top 6. And then as you'll see later on, we get just massive clumps of centers in other spots. So we've got the elite guys and like 25 players who group into different areas. And then there's a drop-off for the solid guys towards the end, and then you're just sort of scrounging for replacements. But, like I've said many times, the center position is one of those ones, along with point guard, they're the 2 positions that if the starter gets hurt, you often get a very clear 1-to-1 replacement. I've talked a lot about Giannis and Anthony Davis yesterday in category leagues. Davis could get hurt, so could anybody. He was pretty healthy last season. Giannis is dealing with some knee problems. He was okay last season with that. His defensive stats, Giannis, have dropped off a little bit over the last couple of years, but he's still hyper-efficient scoring, rebounds, assists, good field goal percentage, never going to hit threes. That's cool. And you also, there's some people, man, I just don't want to punt free throws. I'm not really sure what the problem with that is or why you are averse to that, but if that's what you want, then you probably don't want Giannis, even though it's not a guaranteed punt. But we spoke about these guys pretty extensively in the power forward tier show yesterday. And you'll notice that the man who was the number 1 per game fantasy player last season, the man that was leading all MVP polls early in the season, has not appeared in the top 3 tiers. And I could have made an argument that Joel Embiid could sit in that tier 3 along with Anthony Davis and along with Giannis Antetokounmpo, but I've been pretty clear and pretty consistent on that this season, is that I don't want to take Joel Embiid in the first round. So I'm not going to put him in that zone that puts him in the first round. I've got tier 4 here of Joel Embiid and Domantas Sabonis. Embiid's ADP is 9 on both sides. Sabonis is 12 on both sides. As you're well aware, I will tell you all the time, you cannot predict when an injury is going to happen. You can have risks associated with it. That is true. And sometimes that stuff gets sort of bent and stretched into the wrong spots. But my thing with Embiid has always been, not always been, what it's going to be for this season. You have multiple torn meniscus, same knee. That is a problem. Multiple knee surgeries, same knee, same injury. That is a problem for me of how that recurs. Will they reduce his load at all, his minutes, his usage, his games, to try and preserve him? Because he obviously didn't look good in the playoffs coming back from that. And I say I won't take him in the first round, and pick 12 is the first round. I would take him at pick 12 because I could just stick to my literal guns and take someone else at 12, then take him at 13. And it makes no difference. It's the same thing. Sabonis is a player who is probably losing something with DeRozan arriving, but I don't really know what it's not going to be his field goal percentage. It's not going to be his rebounds. Maybe it is assists. He wasn't getting by on high usage either. We know he's not getting defensive stats. He's a really intriguing player, Sabonis, from a fantasy point of view. He might be completely useless to you. He might be awesome. And I think early second round is probably an okay spot for him to sit. I think that's probably fair enough. It's fair enough for me to tell you, though, that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, up until September the 22nd, I'm going to tell you about this offer for FanDuel. Now, I've spoken to you about FanDuel for so long, America's number 1 sportsbook. But this is a different sort of offer. All customers on FanDuel, if you place a $5 bet, what they give you is 3 weeks free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket thanks to YouTube and YouTube TV. It's so easy. 3 weeks, free trial. You can watch every out-of-market Sunday afternoon NFL game for free. What you need is a YouTube TV base plan. You can then watch all those games. You need to have a valid form of payment and a Google account. straight away, ready to go. And you can cancel that at any time as well. So when you're on FanDuel, you're placing bets, whether it's individual games or totals or spreads or futures or awards or whatever. If it's $5, you get 3 weeks of NFL Sunday tickets. So visit FanDuel.com, FanDuel.com. Download America's #1 sportsbook, and don't forget to gamble responsibly. So we're maybe 14 picks into a fantasy draft here, and we're already 4 tiers down, because that is the gaps between how I value these players. That's how it looks, and as we get further on in drafts, things tighten up. That is a very, very standard and common pattern across fantasy. I've got 3 guys that sit now into tier 5. Young players with growth, room, upside, all that sort of stuff can come here. I'm talking Chet Holmgren, I'm talking Evan Mobley, and I'm talking the delicate dancer Alperen Şengün, all with their own individual concerns. Mobley and Şengün, not great free throw shooters, not awesome ones. Not necessarily high usage for Mobley, but a big shot blocker. Chet should see usage and minutes increase a little bit, but what if his rebounds and his block numbers drop slightly or don't increase with Hartenstein there? If you had to ask me which one of those players I would take first, it probably is Chet, but they're close enough that I put them together. I've seen drafts where people pick Chet in round 1, which is crazy to me. I would never do that. But if you wanted to go back end of second round for Chet and maybe early third of Mobley, or back end of second, early third for Şengün, I think that'll sort of make sense in that area. And as we talk about again, I'll say it again, is that the values of all the players in these areas are relatively smooshed together. So it's not that big of a difference. All it takes is an extra minute here, an extra percentage point of usage, or improving your threes by 3%, or taking 2 extra shots a game, and you're up and down. So easy. It just doesn't take much to move that far. And that's where I think sometimes we get into trouble from a fantasy perspective of really trying to pinpoint this guy has to be ahead of him. There's no way he can't be, when we see it every single year. When you go back and look at the numbers, actually he was 20 spots behind. And then all that changes is he plays 1 more minute and he's ahead. The margins become narrow. And, I talked about this with Dan on his show, Dan Bez, with his show, about the idea of drafting a best player available. That's all well and good, but who's the best player? Who is the best player available? You can't say that with any level of confidence, and that's a lot of this stuff as well, is that we try and put the guys in the spots that we think, and the areas that we think, and the tiers that we think, but the level of confidence changes quite a bit. Let's talk tier 6. After that, that's a group of young, exciting big men there. Mobley, Holmgren, Şengün, through in tier 5. Tier 6 has guys not old, but been around a little bit longer. We're talking Idris Bam Adebayo, Jaren Jackson Jr, and Zion Williamson. I spoke about Zion and Jaren quite a bit in the Power Forward show. I'm not going to talk too much about them, but let's talk a little bit about Bam here, who's got the highest ESPN ADP at 31, and Jaren slightly ahead on Yahoo at 30. Bam has been I'll come out and say it, a little disappointing as a fantasy player the last couple of years. He was looking to be on a really strong, maybe top 18 type trajectory, and then his assist numbers fell off completely. His usage has gone up scoring-wise. He doesn't block any shots. He gets some steals, and then he added an extra wrinkle at the end of last season. He went from being a guy with, I think, about 3% of his shots were 3-point attempts. And then over the final 20 games, it was don't quote me, but you can check the number. I think it's 13% of his shots became threes over the final month or so of the season. Is that real? Is he going to play the 4? Are they actually going to play him at the 4 and play Superman at the 5? I'm not sure they do, but if Bam is taking threes and hitting threes, it actually makes it worse for him in fantasy, because it drops his field goals down. It takes him further from the rim, where he doesn't get as many rebounds. Not that he's blocking shots, but it stops his ability to get more of them. And it just turns him into a slightly worse player. So I don't know how they're going to do that. But I do think this range is fair. And when I look at Bam, I look at Jaren, I look at Zion. To me, Zion out of this group's got the highest upside. Obviously, the riskiest floor. Jaren's really, that one category dependent. He can still score 20 a game. He probably won't. But he's got that one big block number, and then Bam's a different player. He's a usage guy who gets steals, who's a rebounder, but that position shift, if it does happen, and I don't think that it will, but if it does happen, that can have a negative impact on his overall numbers as well. So it's a little weird spot, and I feel like there's been no Bam Adebayo discourse almost at all through any NBA podcast, any fantasy podcast or show or article or anything that I read or listen to or watch. No one is talking about Bam at all. I feel like there's no discussion on him whatsoever. People just sort of think, I guess, he's safe here, and the idea of him being a top 20 guy is sort of floated off. I don't know. There's just been... Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I've missed it. I haven't seen anyone really talking about him at all in that sense. Let's go on now to Tier 7. Feels like we're pretty deep into the list of centers when we get to Tier 7. Not necessarily, but this is a bigger grouping. We've got 7 guys in Tier 7. We'll start off with the first 4 names here. We're looking at Jarrett Allen, DeAndre Ayton, Jalen Duren, and Rudy Gobert. Different players, obviously. Who do you feel the most secure about? It is probably Jarrett Allen. Not sure he's got any level of upside. Not sure there's a gigantic downside. They signed into a contract extension, so he can't be traded until maybe 2 or 3 days before the deadline. So he's going to be in Cleveland, and I don't think Kenny Atkinson is going to be like benching him, but we might lose a minute or two. Ayton was unbelievable. Top 10 player for a 4 or 5 week period, I think, in March or April. Terrible start to the year for the Snowman, but really turned it on. But they also drafted Donovan Kling, and now other players are back. The man will probably take 2 to 3 free throws per month. And we understand that and never block a shot, but scoring and rebounds, and a couple of interesting things that he does. Good field goal percentage. Duren, much like Ayton, built huge, no defensive stats. But good passer, improved his free throws, great rebounder. And then we know what Gobert is. An elite field goal guy, an elite rebounder, an elite shot blocker, who you can debate with your own ass about how good he is as a real life player. That's fine, but he's going to get good minutes. He significantly impacts winning. The Wolves will continue to play him big minutes, and he will do the sort of stuff that he does with some bad free throws if you know how to cope with that, which is not a hard thing to do. So they're all there. They're all different players, and that's the thing you get. Like Gobert might average 2.5 blocks, and Duren might average 0.9. But the value where Duren shoots 82 from the line, and Gobert shoots 62. Made up numbers, but valuations become interesting. And how we view guys and the sort of area that we want to place them for fantasy basketball reasons. Yeah, that's it. That'll bring us to talk about the next tier of guys. We want to talk about the 8th tier of centers. Centers, I think I've only gone out to 12 tiers for centers because there's just a bunch of garbage towards the end. No offense to those guys. In tier 8, I didn't even finish tier 7. My bad. There was 3 other players in tier 7. So actually, let's just bring the original group of tier 7 guys back after that break that I shouldn't have taken at that spot. Allen, Ayton, Duren, and Gobert. And then Isaiah Hartenstein, Karl Anthony Towns, and Miles Turner. Now, you don't have to take Hartenstein anywhere near these guys. There's almost 100 ADP spots difference between Towns and Hartenstein, which, come on, ESPN moment right there. Miles Turner at 86. What are we doing? Hartenstein's at 89 on Yahoo. Cool. None of that really makes any sense. Compare that to some of the ones in that early group, which are all about the same. So I might have Hartenstein probably towards the back end of this tier, but I'm not taking him here. What for? Why would I do that? I would look at all these other guys first, and then maybe I get him 2 rounds later and add in value. Another tier 7-ish type player. Hartenstein's an awesome fantasy player. He has been for years. And he just got paid a big amount. And he's not going to sit there and play 20 minutes a night with 12 usage. I'm very certain of that. I don't think he's getting 30, but I also don't think he's doing what he did in New York. So it is an interesting time, an exciting time to see exactly how Mark Dagnott, one of the most creative and best coaches in the entire NBA, works out how to put him out there and use him with Chet and figure out to actually unlock some of his skills. Because I think he's got more. He's got more that he can bring us versus what we've seen the last 2 years. Tease this a bit already, but these tiers, these middle to late tiers, they become bigger, they become chunkier, become more players in this group. So we're going to talk tier 8, and I've got 8 guys in tier 8. It's no coincidence that we had 7. I mean, it is a coincidence. We had 7 in tier 7 and 8 in tier 8. That is pure coincidence. So in tier 8, we start off with Nick Claxton, who there were people who were considering him a round 3 guy last year. That was always a little bit too high. We always got to be real cautious about banking on absolute upper echelon block and field goal percentage numbers, because if they come down a little bit, then you're cooked, and that happened to Claxo. The Nets have gigantic tank risk in March and April, and there's other players like Sharp and Clowney that maybe have an impact here. But he's fine here. Draymond Green, really different sort of player. Assists out of a center position. Nice rebounds, steals, blocks. Look, it's all good. But he's not for everybody. For some of you, it will make 0 sense to consider him here. I've got Jakob Poeltl in this group. I've got Jusuf Nurkic in this group. 2 guys who at times get underrated. I am not for a single second worried about A, Kelly Olynyk limiting what Poeltl does, or B, Mason Plumlee limiting what Jusuf Nurkic does. They'll limit themselves through foul trouble and whatever they do. But I think actually Nurkic was really good defensively last season. I think there's some, like, if he just has one random outlier field goal percentage bump, he jumps ahead of this pretty comfortably. And I'm not expecting him to do it, but weird things happen. Random things happen. Some of his value Nurk did come from some ball handling, so maybe that drops with Tyus Jones around. But I'm okay with him in this, again, these mid to late round 6, let's say round 6 to round 8, round 9, around 8 more center zones. But you can look the ADPs of 3 of these guys, Green, Nurkic, and Poeltl, on ESPN, are all outside the top 100. Even on Yahoo, Poeltl's outside the top 100, which I cannot abide by that at all. The other side of tier 8, some guys that are pretty good. Jonas Valanciunas, Nikola Vucevic, the big fella Mark Williams, and Ivica Zubats. Zubats got the new extension. I think he's going to play some more minutes this season. Ty Lue does like to go small, but when you don't have Paul George, it is a little bit harder to go small. And there's no Plumlee, there's no Tice there anymore. Part of the ability to go small was using PJ Tucker, and having Paul George and Kawhi playing the 3 and the 4, and you can't do that anymore. Yes, Derrick Jones Jr. is there. We'll see what they do. But a lot of those guys they use in those roles aren't there anymore. Valanciunas, I think he's very comfortably the starting center in Washington, but that doesn't mean 30 minutes a night. I think it's more than the 23 he played last season. And you know my thoughts on Vooch. Invisible defensive stats. Some rough at times, especially for a center, field goal percentage and 3-point shooting, and the risk of a trade or of Jalen Smith just outplaying him the way that Drummond did last season. Now, I guess the counter to that is we saw Drummond outplay Vooch all season, and Vooch still started. But I'm just not super interested. His ADP, Vooch is 42. Mark Williams is 126. That's laughable. I'm not that worried about Mark Williams' back, by the way. I think he's going to be fine. But if we hear anything that suggests he's not, and my man Josh Longstaff in Charlotte taking over the training program, which I'm never going to forget that guy's name, I'm feeling a bit better for now until they prove me wrong. I'm feeling a bit better about where Mark Williams sits. But these are value players. Zubats, Williams, less so Vooch. Vooch is in this group. He's not a value guy because people will take him 5 rounds higher. And Valanciunas, so many guys around the 100 mark, 80 mark. There's a lot of centers in this zone. And usually in drafts, if I'm not getting one of those top-end guys, I find myself getting a Zubats, getting a Poeltl, trying a Valanciunas or a Mark Williams in this area. Let's take a look at Tier 9 now. Is there going to be 9 players in Tier 9 just to follow the pattern? Well, I can't actually remember, but I'll be pretty surprised if there was. No, there is not. So we're good to go there. It's only a smaller tier 9. I've only got 4 guys in here, and I've got the 2 Dallas centers together, Dan Gafford and Derek Lively. And the reason I've got them together, I believe Lively will start ahead of Gafford. But I also believe that Gafford is a slightly better permanent fantasy producer than Lively. I will always default to who gets the more minutes, and I think that's going to be Lively, so I'd take him ahead. I've got Walker Kessler here, who was a clear disappointment last season. Will Hardy had lost a lot of confidence in him. But I do think that we won't get 23 minutes of Kessler this season. 26, maybe. I'm very, very comfortable taking Kessler in this range. Yeah, big problems with free throws, big problems with no assists, no steals, no threes. He gets rebounds, he gets blocks, and he gets field goals. But if he gets 27 minutes a night, well, the blocks and field goals will probably be big enough to make it make sense. And then you got Gafford, you got Kessler, you got Lively. They're all really similar players. Blocks, field goals, rebounds. Then you got Jabari Smith, who's not that. He doesn't really block shots. He shoots threes. He's got minutes and usage upside ahead of all of these players, but to push that to the next level, I don't really know where that comes from in Houston. I hope he can get back to blocking more shots, and he generated a ton of steals at Auburn, but that hasn't happened either. He's never an assist player, but he's a guy with a little bit more offensive juice than these other three guys have in this area. Tier 10 is where we do get back to being a little bit chunkier, a little bit bigger, thicker, more players in this area. I've got in Tier 10, 6 guys. We've got John Collins there. I could easily bump him down. I just don't know what they're going to do with him, whether they're going to start him, whether it's going to be Hendricks or I don't know. And if you're going to lean one way with a team like Utah, you feel like better about them saying, yeah, they won't just persist with John Collins, I'm guessing. But I don't know that. Al Horford, big bump early on. No Porzingis out until January. So Horford's going to get that initial run. It is going to be tough with the lack of the cap on minutes and the back-to-backs being sat out. That's going to be hard. I've got Trace Jackson Davis here. I hope they start him. In 20 minutes a night, he is not this guy. He is not a tier 10 player, Jackson Davis. In 25 minutes a night, he is. He might even be one step ahead, and we just need to see which way they go. Brook Lopez fell off since Doc Rivers took over. The block numbers dropped. We saw he's also old. At some point when you're 36, like it doesn't always hold at the same level. A third coach in 12 months impacted that as well. So I can see Brook beating this, but I'm also not going to invest in this, especially like his ADP 75. No way that I'm doing that. I am feeling better and better every day that Onyeka Okongwu is going to start for Atlanta. He is an absolute that's thievery at the moment. 126 and 123 is ADPs. That's bench player ADP. And I know that his block rate just evaporated last season. He played a little bit more but I think he's going to see 2 to 3 extra minutes this season. And you obviously don't need to go higher to get him. It's pretty crazy to me that Naz Reid has an ADP of 102 on Yahoo, 24 spots ahead of Onyeka Okongwu, who has zero path of being a starter. Naz Reid, 0. Is a much worse defender. He's a better scorer. Maybe that's what it is. He can just score in bigger bunches. But there's a real cap on what Naz can do without injury. So I've got them in the same tier here, but people are going 2 rounds earlier on Naz, and I don't really get that. I don't really get people going 50 spots higher on Brook Lopez than Okongwu either. As much as I would still probably, push comes to shove, with the information we know at the moment, I probably would take Lopez over Okongwu here. But that seems to be just a little bit too big of a gap. We're going to talk tier 11. Actually, I didn't even go to tier 12. We're just going to stick at tier 11. We've got 8 players in tier 11 because this takes us through to the later rounds of a draft. I've added a couple of real flyer types in this as well, just guys that I think you got to consider in your last round picks. So I've got Clint Capella here, whose Yahoo ADP is 91. Maybe they go again and he starts. I don't know. But I'm 100% not using a top 100 pick on Clint Capella. This, to me, is the zone for him. Wendell Carter Jr. sits with 140 on ESPN. He was really quite poor last season. They've still got really strong backups. Now, Wendell is their starting center, but he just lacked a lot of efficiency, and his defensive numbers have never really recovered from year one. So if you want him, fine. The upside's relatively limited. Noah Clowney is a flyer type here. If I was the Nets, I'd like to just shove him straight in as the starting power forward, but Finney-Smith is there and Johnson's there and whatever you consider Simmons, and then Claxton's at center. So it might not happen. Until we hear that it's not happening, though, I think he's at least in that mix to consider because he shoots, he rebounds, he blocks shots, and he is the young piece on that team to see what they got out of. I've got Aaron Gordon here, who's almost the opposite of Clowney. Don't think there's any upside really in Aaron Gordon. He's a bad free throw guy, but it's just rock solid production across the board. Doesn't really get defensive numbers anymore. They sort of cap his minutes to keep him healthy, but he's solid enough with very limited upside in this spot. The other 4 guys that I've got in tier 11, one of them is that flyer guy. It's Carlo Makovic. I don't know whether Makovic is going to start. He probably doesn't. But his competition is Yves Missi and Daniel Tice. Tice has got to be considered the favorite to start, but Tice might play 20. Makovic might play 21, and Zion might get minutes at center. And their team still remains completely confusing with a million wings and nobody to play center really. But if we're just looking at, hey, Makovic does have an interesting fantasy game and maybe there's something here. I'm just include him here. Bobby Portis is low upside. The upside occurs when someone gets hurt, but that to me still is low upside. Because there's no situation where Dr. Rivers is going to sit out there and go, all right, Bobby's actually cooking. Giannis, you sit down. Brook Lopez, you take a seat as well. Bobby's running the show. It's never going to happen that way. It's going to require someone going down for Portis to jump up. I've got Kristaps Porzingis here as well. And his ADP is ridiculous, 68 and 62. He's going to be out, let's say Christmas, but I think January. And not back to full minutes until maybe end of January. And still sitting all back-to-backs. He played 30 minutes a night last season. Not sniffing it this year. Not getting there. So I don't want to touch him unless it's a bench spot and I can hold him there. And the other one, who is someone who is being slept on a little, it's the Knicks starting center, Mitchell Robinson. I don't think the Knicks will go with Julius Randle much at center. Tom Thibodeau will have to break the habit of 15 years of coaching in the NBA to do that. And maybe he does it. But if there's one thing we know about Tom Thibodeau, he is a man that is flexible and moves with the times. Robinson is going to start. He has a huge, huge set of limitations and strengths. He will rebound. He will get good field goal percentage, although that did drop last season. And his block rate also dropped as he had to stay on the court for more minutes. And that is going to have to be the case again. His backup is someone bad, Precious Achiuwa. So they're going to want him to get those minutes. And he's going to shoot 30% from the line. Exaggeration, but also not really. He'll never get an assist, and he'll have a usage of about 4%. But he'll get rebounds, he'll block shots, and he'll have a good field goal percentage. The problem is he had like multiple ankle injuries last season. There's been a lot of lower body stuff which starts to accumulate, and that track record isn't there. But he's in this group, like he's got to be drafted, Mitch. And if you wanted to take him ahead of Porzingis and ahead of Portis and ahead of Matkovic, easy decision to do that because we know the role for him is there. It's whether what he does with that role and how healthy he can stay. Just before we end this out, some other names that I didn't put into the tiers that could have, like an Andre Drummond could sit here. But Andre Drummond's one of those ones that if you look at his overall projection numbers, we can try to guess how many games Embiid will sit, and then Drummond will push up and be averaging 20 minutes a game for the season. You go, oh, actually, Andre Drummond in 21 minutes, that looks like the 120th best player. Maybe I consider that. But what you have to consider is, again, the way that rankings and projections are often produced and shown, it shows you a roto sort of value. Because if Embiid is playing 34 minutes a night, that means Drummond plays 14 minutes a night. And on the games where Embiid is healthy, Drummond is not a usable 12-team head-to-head category league player. But on the nights when Embiid is out, Drummond will be a top 30-ish sort of a guy, playing 30 minutes a night, getting 20 and 20 with a steal and a block or whatever he does. Like ridiculous numbers. But as we know, in a daily changes head-to-head league, you have no bench. You can't stash anything. You've got to use that 14 minutes of Drummond, or like you're sacrificing a streaming slot, which will hurt you. So he's a tough one in a weekly format, in a roto format, in an extended bench format, in a games cap format. Drummond is a draftable player, and you just hold and you wait. But if it's daily changes, no games limit, very hard to do that because you just don't have that stash ability. Got guys like Isaiah Jackson, who's very stashable as well. If something happens to Miles Turner, he's the clear backup there now. Jalen Smith, if you do really believe that Vooch is going to lose minutes. You got Donovan Clingan, although I don't think Clingan is going to be in any position to play 25 minutes a night. Who knows what happens with Rob Williams. Zach Edey could have easily slid into this zone. I worry a little bit about Edey. I think he will start, but I think he'll have almost no usage. And I don't think he's playing starters minutes, but it's very, very easy to put Edey into this group here. I think it's fair enough that maybe I actually should have put him into this tier 11. So Edey could be in this zone here. That's probably the list of guys I say who fall into this area. And that is positional tiers for category leagues done. Let me know what you think. It is hard to do, especially for category leagues and trying to find the right valuations on players. Because, again, most decisions that you get to is going to come down to categorical scarcity, what's already on your team, what you've already built there, what element of risk have you taken with your earlier picks, therefore how much do you take on the next ones. And one of the big key takeaways I want you to get out of this is that the players, as you get further into a draft, become more and more interchangeable. Just consider that. And also, everything doesn't have to be exactly as it has been in the past. So, if you want to hit a thumbs up on this and make it so that the past where there was no thumbs up hit is different to the future where there is a thumbs up hit, do that now. Subscribe and leave your comments down below, guys. We are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.